She didn't just scream at my wife. She walked up to my trained service dog, pulled out a can of industrial pepper spray, and fired. My dog collapsed, choking and howling in pain. The entire veteran event stopped. Cameras turned, and the moment Karen realized what she'd done, her smirk vanished. Because what she thought was just discipline turned into a federal investigation and a jail sentence with her name on it. It was supposed to be a peaceful day. A warm breeze danced across the flags fluttering around the Veteran Community Center as families gathered on the lawn for our annual appreciation event. Kids played with balloons, the smell of grilled food filled the air, and old service buddies swapped stories under the shade of folding tents. I hadn't smiled this much in weeks. After everything I'd been through, years of serving overseas, coming home to a brain full of firecrackers, I finally felt like I belonged again. Not just because of the people, but because of the one companion who never left my side. Samson. My golden retriever, my service dog, was more than a dog. He was my anchor. Trained to detect anxiety spikes, stop panic attacks, and even wake me from night terrors, he had been with me through the darkest parts of my recovery. That day, he wore his blue vest proudly, the one with the clear patches that read, "Service Animal, Do Not Distract." People smiled at him, kids waved, and he quietly stood beside me, always watching, always ready. I was just about to grab a cup of lemonade when I first saw her. Karen. She stood stiffly at the edge of the field, arms crossed, sunglasses on, lips curled in a permanent scowl. You know the type, HOA board member who thinks she owns every square inch of the neighborhood, including the air you breathe. I'd seen her at a few meetings before. Always the loudest voice, always pushing some new, absurd rule. But today, she was dressed like she was on patrol, clipboard in hand, HOA badge clipped to her belt like she was a sheriff, and her eyes were locked on Samson. She walked past two elderly vets mid-conversation, completely ignoring their polite greetings, and made a beeline straight for me. "You can't have that animal here," she said coldly, without even a hello. I blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "This is a pet-free event," she snapped. "You should have read the notice we sent out. No animals. It's a health hazard. What if someone's allergic?" I took a breath, keeping calm. "He's not a pet. He's a federally protected service dog. ADA law says he can go anywhere I go." She scoffed. "That law doesn't apply to HOA-run private events." I held up Samson's ID card and certification, clearly labeled and laminated. "Actually, it does." Karen's face twitched with annoyance. She glanced at the card, then back at me. Sure. PTSD. Everyone's got a condition these days. Convenient, isn't it?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm. My hand instinctively gripped Samson's leash tighter, not out of fear but to keep my focus. He looked up at me, sensing the shift in my breathing. He nudged his nose against my leg, just like he'd been trained to do. I turned to walk away, not wanting to escalate things. The last thing I wanted was to draw attention or cause a scene. This event wasn't about me. It was about all of us, the sacrifices, the shared healing, the second chances. But Karen wasn't done. As I walked toward the lawn chairs set up near the ceremony tent, I heard her mutter, just loud enough for others to hear. "That mutt's making people uncomfortable." A few heads turned. I felt the heat rising in my neck. Still, I stayed calm. I sat down, Samson curled up at my feet, quiet and alert. The event organizer began announcing the speaker lineup. A former Marine took the mic and began a heartfelt story about his fallen squad. People clapped softly, some wiped their eyes, and then I saw Karen again, pacing, staring, whispering to another HOA board member and pointing at me. She wasn't going to let it go. Even though the rest of the community welcomed me, shook my hand, thanked me for my service, Karen had decided I was the problem. Not the man who served, not the guy just trying to live in peace. Number to her, the real issue was the dog. the one creature that helped me stay whole. I knew then, this wouldn't just be a few rude words and glares. Karen was the type to escalate, the type who thought rules applied only to others, the type who saw kindness as weakness and control as power. And I had a bad feeling this day was about to take a turn I wasn't prepared for. Not for me, but for her. Gasps spread through the crowd like wildfire, freezing the once cheerful event in a stunned silence. In the middle of it all, Karen stood gripping the small pink canister, her hand still twitching from the spray. Samson yelped in agony, stumbling backwards, his body writhing in pain and confusion. My chest felt like it caved in. Everything stopped, except my legs, which launched me to the ground beside him as he collapsed on the grass. I could barely breathe, the chemical burn singeing the air around us. Samson pawed at his eyes, whimpering. I cradled his head, frantically shouting for water, for help, for anything. A few people rushed forward, but Karen had already started backing away, her expression morphing from smug to startled. She hadn't expected this kind of reaction, hadn't counted on the crowd turning. "What the hell is wrong with you?" someone screamed. "He's a service dog." "It was just spray," Karen shouted defensively. "He lunged. I was protecting myself and the children." Children? There were no children within 30 feet. Everyone around us saw the truth with their own eyes. Samson hadn't moved, hadn't barked, hadn't growled. He was lying still, just doing his job, and now he was choking on poison. I grabbed a bottle of water someone handed me and began flushing his eyes. My hands shook violently, not from fear, but rage. Blistering, molten rage. This wasn't just an act of ignorance. It was cruelty, malicious, entitled cruelty. And it wasn't going to slide. Paramedics arrived a few minutes later, pushing through the crowd with their kits. A police cruiser followed behind them, lights flashing. As the EMTs knelt beside Samson, one of the officers approached me and crouched low. "Is this your dog, sir?" "He's my service animal," I said through gritted teeth. "She assaulted him without warning, in front of 50 witnesses." The officer's jaw tightened. "We've already had 3 statements confirm that. Stay with your dog. We'll handle her." Karen tried to wave her arms and talk over everyone, claiming it was an HOA matter, that the rules clearly stated no animals at events, and she was just enforcing community safety. But no one was buying it now. People were snapping photos, filming videos, whispering angrily. The crowd had turned hostile. One of the officers finally stepped up to her, calmly stating, "Ma'am, you're being detained on suspicion of animal cruelty and assault. We need you to come with us." Her voice cracked. "You're arresting me for spraying a dog?" "He's a federally protected service animal under the Americans with Disabilities Act," the officer replied coldly. "You just committed a federal offense in front of dozens of witnesses." Karen looked like her world was collapsing. "But I'm on the HOA board." "Not anymore!" someone shouted from the crowd. The handcuffs clicked. I stayed by Samson's side as the EMTs flushed his eyes, gave him oxygen, and wrapped him in cooling blankets. The medic gave me a nod. "He's tough. Good boy. He'll pull through." But it wasn't over. Not for me. Not for her. And not for the HOA that gave her the authority to act like judge, jury, and executioner. She'd finally crossed a line no amount of board meetings or bylaws could fix. And this time, the consequences weren't just social. They were legal. She took a step back like she could erase what she'd done by simply walking away, but the silence around her was already deafening. The crowd, stunned just seconds ago, erupted. Someone screamed for help. Another yelled, "That's animal abuse!" And then, cutting through all of it, came the sharp voice of a woman near the back. "That's a federal offense!" Karen froze mid-step. Samson was still on the ground, his breathing shallow, his whimpers weak. The EMTs worked quickly beside him, rinsing out his eyes and checking his vitals, but I could tell they were concerned. I couldn't take my eyes off him. Every breath he took sounded like fire in his lungs. My fists clenched until my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to do something. But I had to stay with him. Karen, meanwhile, was trying to pretend none of it was her fault. "He came at me!" she yelled, her voice high-pitched now, trembling more than she wanted it to. "He growled. I felt threatened." "He didn't even move," someone snapped. "He was lying down next to his owner the entire time." "You maced a service dog," another woman shouted. "What is wrong with you?" And then, just as Karen turned to make a break for it, a man from the crowd stepped forward. He was older, in his 50s maybe, wearing jeans, a polo, and a jacket. But when he reached into his back pocket and calmly flashed a badge, everything shifted. His voice was low, but it carried like a gunshot in that tense silence. "I'm Special Agent Ruiz, Homeland Security. Everyone stay where you are." Karen's face drained of color. She stammered, What does this have to do with Homeland Security? I didn't know. This is ridiculous. He's just a dog." Ruiz took 2 steps toward her, eyes steely. "He's a registered service animal under federal protection. You attacked him without provocation in public and in front of multiple witnesses. That's not just assault, ma'am. That's a federal crime. And I personally intend to see that it's prosecuted." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked like she might faint. The officers who'd arrived earlier now flanked her, one of them reading her rights as they pulled her hands behind her back. Karen's shrieking ramped up again, trying to spin it into a misunderstanding. "The HOA said no pets. We're not allowed animals at events. It was in the rules. I was just enforcing—" "You're not law enforcement," one officer interrupted flatly. "And those HOA rules don't override federal disability law." With her cuffed, sobbing, and being led away, the crowd slowly started to settle. I stayed kneeling by Sampson, whispering to him, promising him he was going to be okay. The paramedics gave me the nod to say they were taking him in. I climbed into the back of the vehicle with him, never once letting go of his paw. On the ride to the emergency vet clinic, everything hit me all at once. The betrayal, the helplessness, the rage. I'd followed every rule, filled every form, trained Sampson for years. He was my lifeline, my anchor after everything I'd endured serving overseas. And now some self-righteous, power-drunk HOA board member had decided she knew better, and nearly blinded him. But this wasn't just about Karen. It was about the HOA that empowered her, the toxic environment they'd built, the unchecked authority they allowed their board members to wield. This wasn't going to end with her in cuffs. I was going to expose every last one of them. And the best part? The cameras were rolling. Almost everyone had pulled out a phone the moment things got loud. There were dozens of videos already being uploaded, shared, commented on. The story was out, and now, so was the truth. And I was just getting started. Karen's pleas were falling on deaf ears now. No matter how many times she claimed it was just a misunderstanding, the facts were irrefutable. Multiple witnesses, dozens of phone recordings, a registered, well-behaved service dog sprayed in the face for no reason. She tried to spin the story, saying Sampson had lunged or growled, but not a single video supported that lie. He hadn't moved a muscle. He'd been calmly lying beside me, wearing his vest, clearly marked as a medical alert service animal. When one of the officers asked me if I had any documentation, I pulled out the ADA card I always carried. Along with it, I handed over a laminated copy of Sampson's certification, vet records, and his federal registration. The officer reviewed them carefully, then glanced toward Karen, who was now sitting on the curb in handcuffs, her expression switching rapidly between fury and panic. The officer nodded, almost with relief. That's all we needed. That line hit me like a wave. For a moment, it felt like the entire fight for validation I'd dealt with since my diagnosis had just been boiled down into those 5 words. But they carried weight, and justice had finally begun to move in our favor. Karen was charged on the spot with animal cruelty and a federal ADA violation. The latter was serious. She wasn't getting away with community service and a warning. She was cuffed, read her rights, and placed into the back of a squad car, still screaming that she was the victim. She threatened to sue me, the HOA, the police department, even the crowd, but no one was buying it. Her entitlement had exploded in public, and now the law was closing in. I watched as neighbors, many of whom I'd never even spoken to, stepped up to tell the officers what they'd seen. They corroborated every detail. One woman, with tears in her eyes, said she'd been terrified to bring her own support animal to community events because of people like Karen. Another man admitted he'd seen HOA members encouraging Karen's behavior in the past, turning a blind eye because she was just being passionate. It was all unraveling fast. The HOA board was quick to distance themselves, of course. By the time we returned home later that day from the emergency vet, where Samson had been treated and stabilized, I found a generic email from the HOA president waiting in my inbox. It expressed regret over the incident and claimed that the individual involved was not acting in any official capacity during the event. They made it sound like she had just shown up with mace by coincidence. But the neighbors weren't buying it. Not anymore. Screenshots started circulating on the neighborhood app. Old posts, private messages, a photo of Karen proudly posing with HOA board members at the last community fundraiser. A video where she was literally quoted saying, "We don't need dogs around here causing problems." People were done staying silent. They were tired of her toxic control, tired of the board enabling her actions, excusing them as assertive leadership. And most of all, they were horrified that someone so reckless had ever been in a position of influence in the first place. One neighbor took it a step further. He shared that he used to be on the board, briefly, until he realized how toxic it was. He revealed how Karen had pushed for rules banning all non-essential animals from community events, a move he'd protested but was silenced over. Another neighbor revealed that Karen had once demanded the HOA remove a neighbor's therapy cat for emotional manipulation. It was a pattern, and now the floodgates had opened. And what none of them had realized until that day was just how serious the legal consequences could be for violating the ADA. Once Samson was confirmed to be a federally protected service animal, the feds had jurisdiction. Karen's attack didn't just put her reputation on the line, it put the HOA's entire operation under a microscope. The police opened a broader inquiry into HOA conduct, including how they handled member complaints, enforced policies, and empowered their board members to act. Suddenly, the HOA president, who'd tried to brush everything off, was being asked to answer questions he couldn't squirm out of. For the first time, their power wasn't just being questioned, it was being dismantled. And I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The law had Karen, but the truth? The truth had everyone. Karen's day in court began with a smug smirk and a Starbucks cup in hand, like she was about to walk into a PTA meeting rather than face federal charges. Her attorney painted the usual entitled picture. She didn't know the dog was a service animal. It was a chaotic scene. She felt threatened. Every tired excuse in the book. But the moment the prosecution played the video footage for the judge, everything changed. The room fell dead silent as the court watched her raise that can of pepper spray, smirking, and deliberately target my dog, Samson, who was lying still, not making a sound, clearly wearing his red ADA-marked service vest. The judge leaned forward, jaw clenched. Then came the audio, my voice asking her to stop, her response. "I don't care if it's a space dog, animals don't belong at these events." Her attorney shrunk in his chair. The judge turned slowly to Karen. "Did you or did you not see the service animal designation on the vest?" Karen stammered. "I thought it was fake. People fake those things all the time." That was the final nail. The prosecutor stood, clearly prepared. He dropped a thick folder on the bench and announced that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Samson's documentation had been verified and his training certified by multiple organizations. This wasn't about faking anything. This was about a woman who saw something she didn't like and decided she had authority to destroy it. But the real bombshell came next. The prosecutor revealed that Karen wasn't just a rogue HOA member. She'd been involved in multiple past incidents, most never prosecuted, but now reopened due to the federal involvement. At least 3 neighbors had filed complaints about her abusive enforcement of HOA rules, including the illegal issuing of fines and aggressive confrontations with children walking emotional support animals. One incident involved her threatening to call ICE on a family for illegal landscaping. Another neighbor, a retired nurse with PTSD, said Karen had once shouted at her therapy dog and called it a walking excuse. The court was stunned. The judge ordered those incidents to be added to the review. This wasn't just one moment of cruelty. It was a pattern of unchecked power. Karen looked around in desperation, realizing the room no longer saw her as the neighborhood enforcer. Now she was just a bitter bully unraveling in front of everyone. Her husband was nowhere in sight. The HOA board didn't even bother sending a representative. The sentence came swiftly. She was found guilty of violating the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act, guilty of misdemeanor animal cruelty, and guilty of harassment. The judge didn't hold back. She was fined $20,000, sentenced to 90 days in county jail, ordered to complete mandatory community service at an animal shelter, and most notably, permanently banned from holding any position of authority within the HOA or any neighborhood board for life. But that wasn't all. In a surprise move, the judge approved a civil action against the HOA itself. They were ordered to attend ADA compliance training, and their funds were frozen pending an audit of how they collected fines and enforced community rules. A local news crew picked up the story. The headline, "Service Dog Spray Incident Sparks Federal Crackdown on Rogue HOA Practices." Suddenly, the story was everywhere. Samson, the very dog Karen tried to humiliate, became the face of ADA awareness. The mayor's office invited us to a community ceremony where Samson was given a special medal of recognition for his service. Kids in the neighborhood drew him pictures. A local animal rights group reached out to feature him in their campaign. Samson wasn't just my lifeline anymore. He had become a symbol of quiet strength in the face of loud cruelty. And as for me, standing there beside my dog, watching justice unfold, I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't even feel vindictive. I felt something better. Peace. The kind that only comes when you know that, for once, the bad guy didn't get away with it. That the people who abuse their power, hide behind fake authority, and attack the vulnerable, finally met a wall they couldn't climb. That wall was the law, and this time, it stood firm. Karen's name, once tossed around neighborhood meetings with deference and fear, was now only whispered with disdain. Her fall wasn't loud. It was quiet, systematic, and permanent. After her conviction, the HOA removed her from the board within 24 hours. Her belongings were cleared from the office she used to parade around like a throne. Her phone calls, once constant orders barked at residents, now went unanswered. No one wanted to be associated with someone who sprayed a service dog and then tried to justify it in court. Neighbors who had once stayed silent out of fear started to speak up. A single mother shared how Karen used to take photos of her kids playing outside and reported them for unauthorized noise. An elderly man finally admitted that Karen once threatened to fine him for putting up a wreath before December. For years, Karen had ruled like a petty tyrant. But now, with her reign shattered and her record stained, the community realized just how far things had gone and how easily abuse had been accepted. The HOA board, now under the microscope, scrambled to regain public trust. Federal auditors demanded full transparency. They launched a hotline for complaints and opened their once private meetings to the public. ADA compliance officers were brought in for training sessions, and new policy posters were nailed to every community bulletin board. Zero tolerance for harassment or ADA violations, they now read. It wasn't just for show. There were real consequences now. As for me, I didn't care about revenge. I never did. I cared about my dog, Samson, the quiet, unflinching companion who had been by my side through things most people couldn't imagine. He wasn't just a dog. He was my balance, my shield, my breath on the days when the world felt too loud. That day, Karen didn't just spray a pet. She attacked the part of me that kept me whole. It took a while for Samson to fully recover. For weeks after the incident, he flinched at sudden movements, avoided crowded spaces, and even hesitated to wear his vest. But slowly, patiently, with every walk, every game of fetch, every moment of quiet reassurance, he healed. And so did I. We were invited to speak at a local veterans center about service dog awareness and the importance of ADA protections. Parents brought their kids to meet Samson. People asked questions, listened, and cared. I saw a different kind of community start to take shape, one built on empathy instead of fear, on understanding instead of silent obedience. And then one morning, a young man knocked on my door. He had just moved into the neighborhood, heard about what happened, and asked if I'd help him get his emotional support dog registered properly. He'd served, too, dealt with similar demons. I looked at Samson, who wagged his tail with approval, and nodded. That's how change spreads, not just through courtrooms and verdicts, but through conversations, through connection, through people finally standing up for each other. Karen, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale. She served her time, but her social exile continued. No one invited her to events. Her emails to the new board were politely ignored. She was just another resident now. No power, no clout, no say. I heard she tried to move, but her home didn't sell. Too many people knew her story. Too many people knew what she had done. And that's the thing about stories. They stick. Mine didn't end with a bang. It ended with quiet justice, with Samson lying by my feet on the porch as the sun set, with kids riding bikes past the house and waving, with the faint sound of neighborhood laughter where there used to be fear. Sometimes the good guys don't just win, they rebuild what the bad ones tried to tear down. That's what this was really about. Not just punishing Karen, not even just protecting Samson, but making sure no one ever felt powerless again in the place they called home. Justice didn't roar. It stood tall, silent, and unshakable, just like Samson. If this story hit you hard, if you believe no one, not even a powerful HOA Karen, should get away with violating federal law and hurting someone's service dog, then don't scroll past. Hit that subscribe button and join us here on the HOA Stories, where we expose the outrageous, the unlawful, and the downright unbelievable things HOA boards and entitled neighbors try to get away with. Your voice matters. Your views help bring awareness. And your support keeps these stories alive so no one has to suffer in silence again. This is the HOA Stories, where justice isn't optional,